buried in my grave and go home to my love and be free. Yeah. Oh.
Roll Tide, everybody. So, W.E.B. Du Bois. Du Bois was an American sociologist, philosopher, activist, co-founder of the NAACP. And I think what's important to remember about Du Bois is that even as he was influenced by European philosophers, European thinkers, he had spent some time in Germany, he was decidedly and authentically Pan-Africanist. Now, Pan-Africanism is the idea that black people are united in a common struggle the world over. So that means those in Africa as well as those who are the descendants of the African diaspora. So it's the idea that we're united in a common struggle and that we have a common Pan-Africanism. Du Bois was not against white people. He was not anti-white, but he did believe that black people would be best educated by black people. This is why he advocated for immigration with an E. This is why he would find his last days in Africa. He indeed died in Africa because he believed that the African American needed to get in touch with his Africanness. One of Du Bois's biggest points was this idea of the talented tenth. It was Du Bois said himself that the Negro race would be saved by exceptional men. So it was this idea that there needed to be a developed cadre of black intellectuals who would be able to articulate the needs and the aims of black people. Now, we see this in juxtaposition to something, let's say, like the Black Panther Party. The Black Panther Party believed that we needed to educate what they called the lumpen proletariat, the grassroots people, the regular folks, if you will, perhaps even the poor of the community, that liberation and racial elevation would come through the education of those at the grassroots level. That wasn't necessarily Du Bois's idea. So we can sum Du Bois up by pinpointing two, just in a nutshell, themes in his ideology: the idea of Pan-Africanism, that there needed to be a solidarity not only with the actual continent of Africa, but that the American Negro needed to get in touch with his Africanness, and also his idea, his theory about the talented tenth.
I'm building me a home. 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 This earthly house is gonna soon decay.
Booker T. Washington was the ideological opponent of W.E.B. Du Bois. Whereas Du Bois was considered radical, Washington was certainly more conservative. Washington was of the belief that black people should temporarily acquiesce themselves to the evils of segregation and disenfranchisement, and that we should focus rather on self-help, on lifting ourselves by our own bootstraps. Washington cautioned people against, black people against, making a mass exodus from the South. At this time, particularly in the early part of the 20th century, you had this mass exodus of black people from the South into the North, because this is during the time of urban industrialization. Ultimately, Booker T. Washington will be remembered as the founder of the Tuskegee Institute, which he founded at the age of 25. And I think what we can glean from his example is the idea that education is central to the black liberation process, that education in fact precedes the liberation process. And so that even as there are differences between Du Bois and Washington, they are what Martin Luther King Jr. called mutually exclusive. In other words, there's no right or wrong. It's the idea that these men had legitimate ideas about how black people would achieve their emancipation in this country.